The Star Trek franchise is widely known for portraying a socially progressive, occasionally outright leftist vision of the future. While the shows from The Next Generation onward have made this a lot more explicit,
a lot has changed in the past 300 years. People are no longer obsessed with the accumulation of things. We've eliminated hunger, want, the need for possessions. We've grown out of our infancy.
The original series really did sow the seeds for this. While people definitely tend to overstate the utopian vision of Gene Roddenberry, the original series from the 60s did tackle issues like racism, through some pretty flawed metaphor, multiculturalism, through some pretty flawed bioessentialist alien metaphors, and the Vietnam War, through a very flawed metaphor that's actually pretty imperialist in hindsight. It also included a black woman and an Asian man on the bridge of the USS Enterprise, pushing back against white supremacist and patriarchal worldviews, while also simultaneously reinforcing those worldviews.
Women are more easily and more deeply terrified, generating more sheer horror than the male of the species.
A lot. But still, the inclusion of these characters probably did play some part in normalizing racial diversity in America. There's probably a reason why Martin Luther King Jr. himself told Nichelle Nichols not to step down from the role of Uhura when she was considering that. People definitely remember the original series as more progressive than it actually was, but there was definitely something there. At the very least, it was less of a product of its time than many of its contemporaries. So it's no surprise that the inclusion of Pavel Chekhov, the Russian ensign who joined the crew of the Enterprise in Star Trek's second season, has widely been remembered as a similarly progressive aspect of the show. After all, he was a Russian man serving aboard the same starship as people of many different nationalities, including Americans, who was on TV at the height of the Cold War. But was this character really as progressive an inclusion as he's often made out to be? Or is that characterization mostly the result of the cultural memory of the show itself as progressive? That's what I'm aiming to find out in this video. Let's start with the obvious. Chekhov is a blatant and intentional caricature of a Russian, in a way that the other crew members of the USS Enterprise never were. Okay, Scotty the Scot is pretty much on the same level. I guess we should be glad that Chekhov isn't called Ruski or something and that he's actually played by a person of Russian descent and not a Canadian. There is a meaningful difference between those two though. Scotty may represent a huge flattening down of Scottish culture, but Scots were not the subject of American prejudice in the 1960s to an even remotely comparable degree to Russians. Let me remind you again that Star Trek was on during the height of the Cold War. We weren't even 10 years away from their second Red Scare, and anti-Russian sentiment in the West was high, so portrayals like Chekhov's didn't help. The writers have literally one joke about Chekhov, which is that he pretends the Russians invented everything.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
I know this saying. It was invented in Russia.
Where's Apollo?
He disappeared again, like the cat in that Russian story.
Don't you mean the English story, the Cheshire Cat?
Cheshire? No, sir. Minsk, perhaps,
All right.
While it's true that the Soviet government took quite a bit of credit for things that weren't actually developed by the Soviet Union or Russia, they also genuinely invented quite a lot. I mean, they won the space race a bunch of times before America finally scored a single goal and declared that goal to have been the endpoint all along. A lot of this joke is rooted in the then, and arguably now, prevalent idea that no innovation can take place under communism, and so every innovation to have come out of the USSR must have been a lie. And while I'm certainly not defending the USSR's rewriting of history that did definitely take place, it is a little rich to contrast that against the US, a country that has famously never engaged in some creative historiography. Like, there's a good chance that you think Martin Luther King was a liberal who advocated for working within this system. And I hope viewers of this channel know that the Civil War wasn't about states' rights and that the US wasn't mostly abandoned when European settlers found it, but you get my point, right? I mean, there's literally the common phrase Indian giving, which means to give something to someone only to then change your mind and want it back, which is an interesting reframing of a settler colonialist genocide, to say the least. But in spite of that, Kirk and Bones get to smile knowingly whenever Chekhov makes his wild claims, because they're the ones who know how history really went. Also, you know, having a propaganda-spouting Russian isn't the best thing to do when you want to imply that in the future the US and Russia will overcome their petty nationalistic differences. So, not great. What's more, we actually know for a fact that the main reason for including Chekhov was not to portray a future of peaceful coexistence for the US and Russia. The real reason Chekhov was included as part of the Enterprise crew from season 2 onward was to be a heartthrob for the teenage girls out there in the audience. Yes, really.
Take off your shirt, Chekhov.
CBS wanted a sexy character for the youngsters, and Chekhov is the result of that push. His hairstyle was explicitly modeled after Davy Jones from the then popular pop group The Monkees, and Chekhov was constantly paired off with female crew members who were totally into him. Walter Koenig, who portrayed Chekhov, was 31 when he came onto the show, but you gotta remember that Star Trek looked something like this on 1960s television, so having the vague outline of a teen heartthrob was probably enough to be one. As for how this all fits in with the fact that he was constantly made fun of as being ignorant and a brainwashed Russian stereotype, yeah, I have no idea. It should be said that Chekhov's character became less of a caricature after the original series. In the movies, we never hear that one hilarious joke anymore.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
Oh, okay, we don't hear any of that from Chekhov anymore. Unfortunately, the price we seem to have paid for that is that Chekhov is mostly shoved into the background. Most of the movies don't give him very much to do, or have him brainwashed for nearly all of it, but Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is a noteworthy exception that actually does kind of deliver on some of the hopefulness that is often projected onto Chekhov. For those who have not seen it, Star Trek IV revolves around the gang going back to the 1980s to get some humpback whales because they need those to save Earth. But they have all gone extinct in the centuries between then and now. No, I'm not going to explain why the survival of Earth depends on whales being there, just go with it. At some point in the movie, they need some energy from a nuclear reactor to power their ship, and they've heard that there's a nuclear-powered ship nearby. This leads to Chekhov, a man with a very thick Russian accent, asking regular 1980s Americans on the street where the nuclear vessels are.
We are looking for nuclear vessels. Can you tell me where the naval base is in Alameda? We're looking for
This of course raises some suspicion, and eventually leads Chekhov to being captured and interrogated by the Navy. What I find so hopeful about this is that it genuinely doesn't seem to occur to Chekhov that it may be suspicious for a Russian man to be inquiring about nuclear technology in 1980s America. The cultural memory of American Russophobia is apparently so distant for Chekhov that he'd just kind of forgotten about it. So, you know, just add this to the many reasons why The Voyage Home is probably the best Star Trek movie. All of this being said, I don't want to imply that Chekhov's inclusion in the original series was meaningless. It was, by itself, a pretty big statement to include a Russian character in your utopian vision of the future in an American show during the 60s, whether that was the primary reason for including the character or not. I genuinely don't want to take Chekhov away from anyone who felt inspired by his inclusion. It is hard to ignore the Russophobic tropes he plays into though, especially since we have seen that stuff re-emerge with a vengeance over the last couple of years. Like, I get why you hate Putin, especially right now, but does it really do any good to take that on random Russian people in the US and Europe, many of whom explicitly left Russia because of the Russian far right? All in all, I'd say that Chekhov definitely deserves to be remembered as a hopeful, progressive inclusion to the original series at its core. However, as with many things from that show, there should be a huge asterisk behind that statement. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to let me know that by leaving a like. You can also watch one of my other videos, subscribe, ring that notification bell, leave a comment. All of those things help to boost me in the algorithm, so thank you.